What if I told you that the most powerful empire in history, the one that ruled a quarter of the planet, didn't collapse from rebellion or war, but from something as invisible as debt? Because history has a strange habit of repeating itself, and right now, the United States is walking the same financial tightrope that once sent Great Britain's empire crashing down. If you enjoy stories that uncover how money, power, and history are intertwined, make sure to subscribe to Legacy Cave, because today we're tracing the financial autopsy of an empire. It's September 19th, 1949. Inside the British Parliament, the Chancellor of the Exchequer stands pale and exhausted. He announces that the pound sterling, the currency that once ruled global trade, is being devalued by 30% overnight. It wasn't a choice. It was a surrender. After centuries of global dominance, after defeating Napoleon, ruling India, and winning 2 world wars, the British Empire was bankrupt, completely, irreversibly bankrupt. But here's what most people miss. Britain didn't lose its empire to armies or uprisings. It lost it to compound interest. And if you look closely, America is repeating that same mistake. At the dawn of the 20th century, Britain looked untouchable. Its currency, the pound, was the world's reserve standard. Its navy ruled every ocean. Its flag stretched across a quarter of the world's land and people. Debt, barely 30% of GDP, a product of a century of discipline after the Napoleonic Wars. To the world, Britain looked too big to fail. Then came World War I, and the numbers exploded beyond imagination. In just 5 years, Britain's national debt rose from 650 million to 7.7 billion. They had financed victory by mortgaging their empire to America. By 1918, the world's biggest lender had become its largest debtor. The colonies that once served the crown now held its IOUs. Sound familiar? Because today, the US borrows from China and Japan in the same way Britain borrowed from America a century ago. By the end of World War II, Britain's debt had reached over 200% of its GDP. More than half its economy was feeding the war machine. Exports had collapsed. Food shortages were real. Empire that once owned the world couldn't even feed its own people. And then came the final humiliation. The Anglo-American loan of 1946 Britain begged the United States for $3.75 billion, around $60 billion today. But there was a catch. The pound had to be made convertible to the dollar. It was a trap they didn't survive. Within months, the world rushed to trade their pounds for dollars, and Britain's reserves vanished overnight. By 1949, the pound had fallen 30%, and with it, Britain's global power. When a currency dies, an empire dies with it. What followed was quiet humiliation disguised as diplomacy. India gained independence not because Britain chose to let go, but because it could no longer afford to hold on. The same happened in Palestine, Greece, and the Middle East. And in 1956, the illusion of British power shattered completely. When Egypt's Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, Britain and France sent troops, but America didn't send soldiers. It sent financial pressure. President Eisenhower threatened to sell off US holdings of the pound, collapsing Britain's reserves. Within days, the British government surrendered, not on the battlefield, but in the markets. That was the moment Britain learned that global dominance doesn't end with war. It ends with debt dependency. Fast forward to today. America's federal debt is over $33 trillion, nearly 130% of GDP. This year, the US will spend more on interest payments than on its military. Over $880 billion. That's exactly how Britain's fall began. The US now operates 865 military bases worldwide, spends nearly $1 trillion a year on defense, and holds a reserve currency whose dominance is fading, down from 72% to 59% of global reserves. Meanwhile, countries like China, Russia, and India are building trade systems that bypass the dollar altogether. History doesn't repeat word for word, but it rhymes perfectly. There's a rule economists call Ferguson's law. When a superpower spends more on interest than on defense, it stops being a superpower. Britain crossed that line in the 1940s. America crossed it in 2024. It starts with debt. Then comes inflation, then devaluation, then loss of influence, and finally, dependence on your former rivals. That's how every empire dies, not with an explosion, but with a signature on a loan document. So what does that mean for us? For the ordinary people watching history unfold? When the dollar loses value, your savings lose value. When America's debts spiral, your standard of living declines. When the reserve currency status fades, your independence fades with it. This isn't just a government problem. It's a generational one. If you want to protect yourself, start by diversifying, own real assets. Strengthen your skills and, most importantly, stay aware, because those who understand history can prepare for what's coming. Britain once thought it was invincible, that the rules of economics didn't apply to empires. But those same rules ended Rome, bankrupted Spain, and humbled Great Britain. And if America keeps walking this path, the question isn't if it ends, it's when. Because every empire believes it's the exception, until the bills come due. Another piece of the past uncovered, inside the legacy cave.